Hello, my name is Bailey Lepley, and today in my presentation I'll be going into the effects of BLM and the ways that it interacts with social media and social media activism as a whole. So starting out with my problem statement, I feel like most people, including myself, had noticed that Gen Z is one of the most active generations when it comes to social justice, as well as being the most likely to participate in activism through online measures. This being through social media like Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. But is this really an effective way to provide engagement to these movements? Many people have varying opinions on that, so I wanted to go through and take a look at exactly where this falls. So for my target audience in my final project, I decided to focus primarily on Gen Z college students, this being students ages 18 through 22, and I wanted to primarily focus on people who use social media. And based off of my target audience, I went ahead and drafted my original research question, which was, how can I create a resource for Gen Z individuals aged 18 through 24 to contact elected officials about the BLM movement in a way that is quick and easy to understand? And so from my original research question, I began running with interviews with a large set of people through the use of cultural probes. So typically with a cultural probe, this consists of having participants participate in a conversation-based interviews surrounding the reactions to physical artifacts. And in this case, I decided to have my participants react to images surrounding BLM. So some examples of this were images of murals, social media posts, and also including stuff from the opposite side. So MAGA merch or All Lives Matter propaganda. And in this case, I just had my participants sit down and have an open conversation based around these images that I placed in front of them. As well as this, I did something that was a lot more structured, including interview style questions. So with this, I went into the conversation with set interview questions, and if participants wish, we could divert from those questions and have a conversation. But I chose a select few from my original cultural probes interviews and decided to do the interview questions with them as well. So one key thing I looked into while looking into my cultural probes with my participants is I did have them react to pre-made templates for contacting elected officials, and generally all participants agreed that the scripts, when used too closely, were generally unhelpful since it didn't make it unique in any way, and when elected officials receive the same script over and over again, it could be easily ignored in the grand scheme. But it was also agreed upon that it could act as a good starting point to work off of when contacting elected officials. Many participants as well felt as though the pandemic had hindered their ability to engage in activism in person, but it also forced them to get more creative with how they can participate online, especially through areas of social media like Instagram. And most participants also felt that online activism could be helpful and even act as a strong way to change minds. For instance, if someone's on the opposing side, they can do their own research and come to their own conclusion, and maybe even change their viewpoints rather than having someone, tell them it in person and just forgetting it later. So briefly after my research phase, I did have a moment to step back and decided it would be best to change my direction a little bit. I had a very difficult time finding a good direction to gear my findings in a way that would be helpful, especially surrounding like the issue of contacting elected officials. So in the end, I ended up taking a step back and looking more broadly at how Gen Z handles these issues and problems that may arise from these current systems in place. And I wanted to really explore the relationship between social media and Gen Z itself, since so many of our participants had brought that up surrounding their activism now, especially with the pandemic. So following out my decision to make this change in direction came my new research question, which was, how can I recreate a resource for Gen Z individuals aged 18 through 24 to help educate them on performative activisms and ways to prevent apathy when engaging in BLM activism online. So from here, I started the second phase of my research process. After reflecting on a new starting point, I went back and I had some more sit-down interviews, and I also reviewed my previous information from my past interviews and cultural probes, and began dissecting social media and BLM as a relationship with each other, rather than just deciding to focus on the relationship between BLM activists and contacting elected officials and simplifying that process. As well as conducting this additional research, I also had the great privilege of experiencing historic sites of civil rights movements in person over my spring break. So I actually visited Alabama and Mississippi, and two places that really had stuck out to me was on the bridge in Selma, Alabama, as well as the Legacy Museum. The Legacy Museum was absolutely beautifully designed and had many great ways of storytelling and putting into words exactly what BLM stands for, which is fighting for Black Lives Matter, and putting into design the absolute feeling of Black folks and our general message. And I wanted to take into account our trip when designing and looking for inspiration and how I chose to communicate my message in my final zine. So here's my final project in its final form in mock-ups. I decided to use a zine in general as my final project form because it was small and easy to distribute around the campus. And I felt like it would be really fun to design and play around with since it doesn't require any formal rules like other editorials. And it can allow me to like play a lot with like different designs and make it really visually appealing. And hopefully, I was hoping when I distribute it around campus because of this, it'd be appealing for someone to pick up and read because like it's unique looking and it doesn't look like a normal magazine. On the back, I did include a QR, and when this QR code was scanned, it would take you to a Google survey where feedback could be given onto that particular zine, and people could leave feedback on what could have been included, as well as leave feedback on whether or not this helped them come to the conclusion of doing my call to action, which was engaging more in meaningful social media activism rather than stuff that is typically seen as performative. So after completing my finished zine and printing them, I decided to begin my testing process, which included me distributing them around campus, and I actually placed these on a map, which can be seen on the right. I took 2 of them and placed them in King Library, 2 in Armstrong Student Center, 2 in Shriver, and 1 in the art building. Locations were primarily chosen for high foot traffic, where I thought they'd be most likely to be picked up by a student, and with the high hopes that they would complete the survey that was completed on the back. So after my testing did come my testing results. Unfortunately, I was working with very many limitations. Copies were very expensive to make, and I was only able to produce about 10 of them. And from these 10 copies, I did have to keep multiple copies for my own use. And since I was working with such a small amount of zines, I did receive no responses for my QR codes, and I think this is just a result of my testing pool being very small and kind of relying on people just happening to find those few copies out there and responding to them. So from this, I decided it would be best to test again, and this time in person with someone else, like physically. And this wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do at first, since I wanted it to allow people to have time to reflect and digest the information being presented to them. However, I knew that if I did it in person this time, it would guarantee it will yield some kind of testing results and feedback that I can work from and choose whether or not my zine did in fact have a successful outcome that I was aiming for. So in this testing pool, instead of just general college students that like may walk by and find it, I decided to focus more on BLM activists as well as BLM supporters, especially since I feel like they can give a very clear idea of the content of what is in the zine and whether or not it aligns with their own personal views as well. So with the process of retesting, I met with students in person for more feedback on the zine content and ways that the information was presented. When I met with people, I was met with overwhelmingly positive feedback. People were BLM supporters who have mostly shown support through online measures, did find that the zine was helpful and did contain like valuable information that they will apply in the future regarding online activism and ways to steer away from performative activism as well as apathy that social media may cause while performing in online activism. So despite my zine testing phase being a failure in my first round, I did find that my zine was an overall success in my second testing, and I do plan on in the future possibly continuing to make additional volumes and I'm gonna try to make it not in a custom size so that if I do choose to print in the future, it could be cheaper and I can make more volumes to distribute. I also had some people suggest that I even consider doing it online instead, which I think is a great idea. And I think as next steps, like that may be something I will be taking into account in the future. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for viewing.